Hi, I'm Congressman Sandy Levin. This week we ran an online town hall to discuss the Republican budget proposal, and over 180 people participated, and as a group they voted 4,000 times on the top questions offered during the online town hall. So I want to thank those of you who were able to participate, and today I'm going to answer a sampling of the questions. Republicans in Congress are pressing for a 2011 federal budget that I believe harms education, health research, and basic public safety. Many economists have also expressed concern that that budget threatens our current economic recovery and our nation's long-term economic competitiveness. We need to get a hold of the deficit, that's for sure, not in ways that suffocate needed programs, but in ways that do promote economic growth. I'm committed to economic recovery, key investments in our future, and deficit reduction, and I believe that all three can be accomplished if we work in a constructive, balanced fashion that reflects the will of the American people. So, our first question comes from Ray in Pleasant Ridge. And here's what Ray wrote. I'm concerned that we are not investing more money in higher education. Education funding has changed so much that an average student leaves college $25,000 to $60,000 in debt. How can they contribute to our economy when the banks own their cash flow? I completely agree. We want more young people to go to college, and we don't want them starting their careers saddled with massive debt. The approach to education in the Republican budget was one of my top concerns. They want to cut an individual Pell Grant by 14%. 20,000 students in my congressional district received Pell Grants, 20,000 this year, to help go to college, and for those with limited access to private loan assistance, that cut could be the deciding factor in skipping college entirely. Our second question comes from Paul in Sterling Heights, and he writes, budget cuts alone will not achieve the desired result. When will Congress tackle tax reform, tax simplification, or at least tax hole loophole elimination? Well, we do need to do tax reform. We need to do it the right way. Last year, when I was chair of the Ways and Means Committee, we enacted legislation that cracked down on very wealthy individuals seeking to hide assets in tax havens and avoid U.S. taxes. This bill helped offset the cut of a direct incentive, tax incentive, for hiring U.S. workers, and was estimated to raise $8.7 billion over 10 years. We also shut down loopholes in our international tax system that allowed, get this, multinationals to avoid $10.7 billion they owed in U.S. taxes. So you're exactly right that budget cuts alone can't balance our budget. So far, conversations about tax reform have focused on corporate taxes and the need for corporate tax reform so it doesn't add to our deficit. Many people refer to the over $1 trillion in tax expenditures, that's what they're called, in our tax code, and they refer to them as special interest provisions. However, the reality is that most of these are actually broad-based provisions, like the mortgage interest deduction and the deduction for state and local income tax, that benefit a large segment of hard-working, middle-income taxpayers. So, we should always pursue simplification and closing tax loopholes, but tax reform is more difficult and it's just beginning. I will be working to ensure that any tax reform proposal helps create jobs, benefits working families, and does not add to our deficit. Now a question from C. Farrell in Clinton Township, and here's the question. One of the future challenges that the U.S. faces is affordable energy. Do we know that? What positions do you support for our mid- and long-term energy policy? That's an especially good question today. Energy is the lifeblood of our economy. We surely know that in Michigan. We need energy that's reliable and affordable, and whenever possible, supplied from domestic sources. We need a partnership between the public and private sectors to develop clean energy sources and bring down the cost. This is good for the environment and for job creation. So I've worked hard in Congress on efforts to help private industry to develop new technologies like advanced batteries and transportation technologies. This will create new industries and jobs in our state and also lessen our dependence on foreign oil. But we have to get moving. We have to get moving because other countries are unfairly subsidizing their industries and seizing market share. Some estimates are that in 5 years, China will dominate the entire solar manufacturing sector, and we can't let that happen. And government must play an active role with the private sector, a real partnership. Our next question comes from Mike in Clinton Township, and here's how it went. The U.S. is among the top countries in the world in education spending, and yet we continue to lag in test scores. Instead of throwing more money at education, maybe we need to look at reforming the education system. What is your solution to education? Well, I've been working at this for a long time with first my 4 kids and now 9 grandchildren. I believe that we have to invest in our schools and have high, effective standards that hold our entire system accountable. There's nothing more important, nothing, than educating our kids. And quite frankly, we're not doing a good enough job. I visit a lot of schools and talk to the kids, to a lot of educators, superintendents, and school board members. This notion that they have all the adequate resources they need isn't quite right in many cases. That is why I'm so worried about the Republican budget that makes cuts from Head Start through K through 12 and limits higher education opportunities. So next, from Pleasant Ridge, here's what Mark wrote. A real question. The Asian carp will devastate the Great Lakes and is literally at its doorstep, our doorstep. How will the proposed cuts affect the efforts of the federal government to keep that species at bay and out of our great natural resources? We received quite a few questions on this. Let's be clear, the carp pose a clear and present danger to the Great Lakes. If they become established in the Great Lakes, they will decimate our region's $7 billion fishery and put hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk. The most important thing to know is that the Asian carp have a number of potential pathways to reach the Great Lakes, so there's not a single silver bullet solution. We need a comprehensive defense, comprehensive. We recently added a 3rd electric barrier to keep the carp moving from the carp-infected Illinois River into the Chicago shipping canal that leads to Lake Michigan. We've also set up a number of other barriers to prevent the carp from reaching Lake Michigan when nearby rivers flood. We're also using electrofishing to catch carps in the Illinois River, and we have made arrangements to export 30 million pounds of carp a year to China. Unfortunately, the Republican budget bill that passed the House would make deep cuts in the program that's funding the federal government's effort to stop the Asian carp. That's one reason I think that resolution will not pass the Senate or become law. Our next question comes from Jim in Warren. When will all of the Congress and Senate take a pay cut and live on the same pension and health benefits like the rest of us? I'm glad you asked that. It's often asked. Here's the answer. We have voted to freeze members' pay for the last several years, and I'm sure we'll do so, and we should do so again the coming year. The House has also voted earlier this year to cut congressional office budgets. Now let me say this with regard to retirement and health benefits. There's some confusion about just what members of Congress receive. we are required to pay into both Social Security and Medicare. We purchase private health insurance, the same as all other federal employees, and our employer, in this case the federal government, shares the cost of buying this health insurance. I was one of the first offices to make transparent all spending by my office on my website. I'm covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield like millions of others. Tim from Michigan wrote, is there any way we can stop sending out foreign aid to countries that don't need it and use that money here in our own country with the exception of emergency aid? I saw a poll the other day that showed that those polled believe foreign aid takes up 27% of the overall federal budget. In fact, foreign aid constitutes 1% of the budget. Some of this goes to help other nations facing emergency situations, such as helping Haiti and now Japan as it recovers from earthquakes. We also provide help to other nations in the era of counterterrorism, combating weapons of mass destruction, counter-narcotics, and transnational crime. We also provide assistance to poor nations with development assistance and health programs to combat HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and other deadly diseases. We've got to keep in mind what the realities are. And now a question from Joyce in Clinton Township. It goes like this. In order to help solve our energy problems, will you support the building of more nuclear plants and opening up all our untapped oil reserves? Well, as we're now seeing in the Japanese reactor crisis, as we saw last year with BP, their oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, both nuclear power and oil drilling are not without problems. I believe that our country needs a mix of energy sources, but we can't turn a blind eye to safety or environmental concerns. So, in the case of nuclear, we need to figure out what happens with Japan's reaction and apply the lessons here. By the way, the U.S. currently uses 25% of the world oil, but we have just 3% of the reserves of oil. And this oil is increasingly located in places that are difficult to reach. Most of this oil is used in the transportation sector. And that's why I support developing advanced batteries, as we're doing, and plug-in electric vehicles, as we're doing, and in Michigan. This is a way to create new industries and jobs here in America and in Michigan, and reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Marilyn in Pleasant Ridge asked, can we do something to lower the amount going to our military without jeopardizing our safety? Yes, we can, but we need to be careful. Defense spending represents 20%, about that, of the federal budget. There's no way to make a serious effort to reduce the deficit without also making reductions in defense. And the Secretary of Defense has outlined more than $100 billion in Pentagon spending cuts over the next 5 years. So now for our last question from Joa in Southfield. And he wrote, or said, I fear we are skating on thin economic ice. Will you be able to put politics and rancor aside and compromise with the Republicans in order to promote the general welfare and secure our future? Can we afford to have it all right now? You know, it's often said that a budget reflects one's values. I think it also speaks to one's vision for the future. I'm committed to economic recovery, jobs, key investment in our future, and deficit reduction. And I strongly believe that all three can be accomplished, all three, if we work in a constructive, balanced fashion that reflects the will of the people in my district and the American people at large. But I also intend to stand up and oppose efforts that I think hurt our economic recovery and limit key opportunities like higher education and advanced manufacturing incentives. We need to seek common ground while maintaining our basic values. So again, thanks for asking questions and listening in. This week we held both a telephone town hall and this online town hall. And while I prefer to be at home with you in person, I find that these are good ways for us to stay in touch. So let's continue to do so.